unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello everyone and welcome to In Depth, the production of Souls and Liberty. 56 days to go until the election. And not only is the White House up for grabs, but American citizens are actually encountering their date with destiny over abortion in, count 'em, 10 different states. Joining us today to catch up on all of this is Jim Ellis, who's going to break all of that down for us. I'm Gary Michael Vorse, coming to you from Houston, Texas. Jim, welcome. Take us through it. 10 states. This is a large number of states, considering that a good number of them, 7 or 8 or 9, have already done all of this. I mean, we're getting close to every state already deciding.
Yes, well, this is through the initiative process. And of course, you go through and petition to get issues on the ballot. That is possible in 24 states. And so 10 put it on the ballot this time. Now, Missouri, judges ruled that they did not qualify. So as of now, of course, the left is appealing that original decision. So they're trying to get the Missouri one back on the ballot. Right now, it's not on. But the other states that are considering or will have abortion initiatives, and in most instances, it's to put there's the so-called right to an abortion in that state's constitution. That's what most of them do. And they're present in Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Maryland, Missouri, we mentioned, that is probably off the ballot. It's off the ballot right now. We'll see what happens with it. Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New York, and South Dakota. So all of those people that live in those states will have to vote on the abortion issue. Now, the main reason they're putting this on there is, A, to get this locked into the Constitution. Because as they were saying in Colorado, for example, in case the Democrats ever lose control of the state government, we want to make sure that the right to having an abortion is protected in the state constitution. That's issue number one. Issue number two is to help drive Democrat and left-wing turnout for the overall election. And that's particularly in play in Arizona, Nevada, and well, I guess really just those two, Arizona and Nevada, are really the main ones where we'll see this issue be a very focal point in getting people to get to the polls. And we saw that in 2022, where abortion did prove to be a vote driver for the left. And one reason why the 2022 elections turned out the way they did. And so obviously they're trying, the Democrats, the left of center groups, are trying to promulgate that again, thinking that we can get these suburban women. That was where the uptick was really felt, in the suburbs around the country. Female voters turnout way up. That's what they're trying to emulate again.
From a strategy point of view, obviously, as you said, it worked in 2022. It's curious that almost every state you named is a red state, and not so much from a political strategy, but from a spiritual standpoint, from a mindset. It says, and we already saw this in Kansas and Ohio. I mean, I think the Ohio pro-abortion win was 10 points or something, I think.
Yes.
This is really troubling.
Oh, it is troubling. And the reason these states are on the ballot is because they have the initiative and referendum process. Mm-hmm. And it's most of that's in red states because they're more open. And, the party of democracy, of course, the Democrats, also the ones that are trying to, who's trying to get Robert F. Kennedy off the ballot where they think it helps them, who got the Green Party off the ballot in Nevada. On and on, we see the Democrats shutting down democracy as opposed to opening it up. So it's not surprising that these red states are the ones that have more open democracy, where you have the initiative and referendum. The closed states are the ones that generally don't. So again, 24 of the 50 states, you have this process where you can, the citizens can go out and get petitions and qualify issues to be voted on by the general public. So 24 out of 50. And as you pointed out earlier in our broadcast here, some of the states have already done this, and so they're going through and trying to do this in all 24 of the states where they can.
Yeah. I guess one of the main drivers of this as a strategy was Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. They were one of the first states after the the Dobbs decision was handed down. They're one of the very first states to enact this, and of course, she got what she wanted.
Yeah.
And they're just, they set up a blueprint, and now they're all following it.
Yes, they are, and that's pretty much typically what they do, and it makes some sense. If it works one place, it could work others, and that's their goal here. And of course, it's to have no restrictions on abortion too. Mm-hmm. And again, we don't see the pro-life movement countering with their own initiatives to put at least restrictions on these. Let's limit the late-term abortion and add parental consent. Those types of issues would pass among the general public. That's shown over and over again that the pro-life position is the majority on those particular issues. Senator Marco Rubio proved that in his race in Florida. Governor Mike DeWine did the same thing in his reelection. And keep in mind, Marco Rubio was outspent by $30 million in his race last time. And it looked like it was going to be a very close race. He had a very difficult opponent. And it was the congresswoman at the time from the Orlando area, Val Demings. And before she was in Congress, she was the chief of police of Orlando, and her husband was the sheriff. So the other thing that was off the table for Rubio was the crime issue, which was a mover for Republicans, because a police chief and a husband who's a sheriff, you're not really going to run a soft on crime attack on them, which he didn't even try. And at the end of the day, because I think one reason, he was the only one in the federal level that I saw in the 2022 campaign that didn't put his hand in the sand on abortion and came out fighting and said, no, she's the extremist on abortion because she's for late-term abortion and she's against parental consent for minors. And he wins by 17 points. And that was 7 points higher than the polls were showing at the time. And I think that was one of the reasons he did so well. And I think it was a model for other candidates, but they're not following it. And instead, they just want to try to ignore the issue because they think it cuts against them instead of going out and aggressively fighting on it. Now, I think this is a problem, and I think this is why we see of these 10 states we talked about, where the left qualified, or looks like they qualified in 10, Missouri's likely not, but only in Nebraska do we see a companion initiative that puts restrictions on the abortion issue.
Yeah, let me shift from politics, although it has an effect politically. Let me shift from that for a moment and talk about the failure to mobilize against these things on the part of Christians in general, but specifically not just the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, but the individual state conferences. I mean, here's 9, maybe 10, probably 9 states that have relatively sizable Catholic populations. I mean, the state conferences never seem to have a problem mobilizing for, social justice, this, that, or the other. But Catholic bishops, not just the national conference, but all of the state conferences too. Where are there, I don't mean just writing some strongly worded statement and bearing it on their website.
Yeah.
I'm talking about where's the initiative, where's the plan to get the pastors to find teams of parishioners and pro-lifers who will go out and sit at the tables with, at county fairs and all of this stuff over the summer and the nice weather months, and stand in parking lots in shopping malls and get people to sign stuff. Where is all of that? And we all know where it is. It's non-existent. Why don't they do this?
And it's not because people wouldn't be willing to do it if they knew what to do and were, given ideas on how to do it in the organization structure. Where is the clergy on this?
Yeah.
Why are they not coming forward? And that's something that I think we all need to be looking at. It's obviously too late for this election, but if in the future, depending on how it turns out, and really no matter how it turns out, this issue has to be faced and has to be organized and moved forward. And I think the best way to attack it is incrementally. So obviously the people want this. There's no question about that. I mean, they win all of these initiatives in red states. And if they're winning in places like Kansas, which they did, then it's pretty tough to go against that. But you can do so incrementally. And in fact, that's the left's model. When it takes them, they have a long-term strategy and they go for things that they want. Climate change is a great example on how they do this incrementally. That's what the right of center pro-life movement has to do too. Let's start with things that people agree with us on the abortion issue, which is late-term abortion, banning that, and also parental consent for the minors. And that is where the left is vulnerable, and that's where we need to see our own people doing initiatives, and us, specifically us and others, to putting pressure on the bishops and the clergy to start getting involved in this.
Yeah, I mean, there is no pressure. I mean, I've said this a few times and roasted for it and stuff, but I think the pro-life movement in America is, half drunk. The individual people do things very well. A group of people go, for example, and, every week, very committed, or weekend or whatever it is, and, pray in front of this abortion clinic and that abortuary. Never mean to call it a clinic. That's a slip of the tongue. As a collective leadership, I'm sorry, it's just not there. It's never really been there. They got caught with their pants down after Dobbs, thinking, it's just wrong thinking. There's never aggressive enough politically. And this is just like chapter 2 of what we saw for the first 50 years after Roe. Running around, playing catch up, or chickens with their heads cut off, not understanding what's going on. Where's the pressure with the bishops? Why aren't there 100 Catholics in front of the chancery? 100 pro-life Catholics in front of the chancery of every diocese in the country where the bishop just says nothing about this. Where are the signs? Where are they standing out? Where's the pro-life movement organizing petition drives, getting local media? Because local media covers these kinds of things. National media doesn't. But local media covers these things.
Right.
Bishop, how dare you let these children be killed? Why won't you open your mouth? This diocese has a $300 billion endowment. Why aren't you tapping that to save lives? There's no effort like that at all, ever.
Right.
And, a place like Kansas, the pro-lifers got shellacked in that referendum. I think that was the first one, but they've gotten shellacked in every single one of them.
I think it was, and it was in the primary.
Yeah.
They put that on the primary ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And the turnout was record high.
Yep.
And it was overwhelming. It was about 2/3 in favor.
Yep. And remember, I got to interject, Jim, because I need to get people to understand how just not in the game to the degree they need to be, the pro-life leadership is. Immediately when that Kansas result came down, because that was solo, that was the first one, and it was the only one at that moment.
Yep.
All of the chatter in the pro-life circles is, oh, they cheated. Oh, that's not really that bad. Oh, they rigged the vote. Oh, they brought in all of this outside money, and that's what it was. Meanwhile, you did nothing. Sat around and grimaced on social media sites. There's no aggression. We see this across the board with conservative movements, politicians, the whole bit. That's why somebody like Marco Rubio is such a standout from a political arena perspective. But on the social, there just isn't. The bishops, I think we have to just say this. The bishops don't give a damn about abortion as an issue. They just don't. You can't have this for 50 years. Even at the pro-life march that Nellie Gray used to have, you'd have a smattering of bishops up on that stage in front of 2, 3, 4, 500,000 people. I've been to that march numerous times. 3 or 4 bishops, maybe 5 or 6. Dudes, there's 300 of you in the country, retired, auxiliary, and ordinaries. Where are you? They say nothing. And then they produce that stupid ass voter's guide, conscious and faithful citizenship, which is like, well, abortion's bad, but as Supich would say, so's not having a job for a month, and there's no pushback against this. Catholics are, as faithful Catholics, are brain dead. And I'm a faithful Catholic, brain dead when it comes to this issue with the bishops. They refuse to confront and be aggressive. And people like me who were doing that, well, we get castigated and called all sorts of names, and you can't say you're Catholic and all that sort of stuff. The Tim Bushes of the world, multi-billionaires, who build business schools to themselves and their own glory on Catholic campuses. Not a peep. Nothing. Maybe they write a check for $10,000 to print up some flyers or something. There's no aggression. And you're seeing the results of it right there in the polls. As some guys on social media say, prove me wrong.
Exactly right. And really, I think you're hitting it right on the money that, the pro-life movement really has to start over on this now.
Yep.
And you're right. I think the target is not the politicians. It's the Catholic bishops. And the grassroots efforts have to be geared to them to get them to start doing something and come out against this. And let's just start on late-term abortion and parental consent. And that way, at least we get the ball rolling. Come up in the next election with initiatives in the favorable states to put those types of initiatives on the ballot, and they will pass. And then you begin to chip through some of this, and this reproductive rights stuff, and this is a health issue for women. I mean, that's absurd that it's a health issue. And if the presidential election goes the wrong way, this is only going to get worse. And then we're going to talk about all the funding that will go, the increased funding that will go to pay for all of these procedures for everybody. And then let's talk about the Colorado law. The Colorado law, and they're one of the 10 states that has an initiative on the ballot. Now, the governor there said this was not true, but it was in the law, and I'm not going to disagree with him on this. He signed this bill to put this to put Colorado in the group of states that guarantee the right to an abortion. But at what point in time in that bill, and I read this bill, that they would allow an abortion up to 28 days after birth. Now, the governor was criticized for signing that bill, and he said there's no way that was in there. And he is a left-winger, Governor Jared Polis in Colorado, but he hasn't been that bad. And he was actually pretty good during COVID. He was one of the first governors to open up, so I kind of trust him. And he said that wasn't there, and that may be the case. They may have taken that out finally before it got to his desk, and then no one challenged that at the end too. But the fact that was in that bill originally.
Yeah, some Democrat wrote that in while that bill was being orchestrated. They put that in.
And I kind of agree with him when he said I would never sign such a bill. I kind of agree with him on that. So let's assume that it's not the law, but it was in the bill originally. But that tells us where they're headed. So late-term abortion is not good enough. Now we're going to get into a post-birth abortion. And that bill originally said that you could then have an abortion 28 days after birth, and that's where they're headed.
Yeah, that's not an abortion.
No.
Well, I mean, that's what they had in Virginia. Remember, that was Northrop with as well. The baby survives the abortion, and we'll leave it on the table there, and we'll have a discussion about what to do. Meanwhile, there's the baby laying there on the table, and
we'll have a discussion as to what to do.
Yeah, we'll have a discussion.
Governor Ralph Northam, in fact, that night he came out with that. I was at an event downtown, and this fellow says to me when this subject came up, and he says, well, if that's the case, he said, I'm concerned my mother would abort me, and I'm 54. But that's the absurdity.
Yeah.
That's the absurdity as to where we're headed. And that's where it has to be stopped. And I think you're absolutely right. The main target should be the Catholic bishops to begin.
Yeah. I mean, they do represent, although it's shrinking, they do still represent the single largest religious group outfit in the country. It's not a denomination because it's the original church. Protestants are denominations, but nonetheless of religious bodies.
Right.
Catholic Church is still the largest one in the United States at about 22%. The bishops are sitting.
Well, and there's no reason we can't get evangelical leaders in on this too. I mean, there's no reason there can't be operations against them as well. Yeah, they haven't done much either.
No, they haven't. I mean, we encounter lots of Protestants in this work that we're doing, and very good ones, and they say the same thing. They have the exact same criticism that from their side of the religious aisle. Does that make sense? Religious pews, from their side of it, the exact same complaint. They won't do anything. They just say nothing. It's a little bit, here's the difference, I think. On the Protestant side of this issue, you have lots of pastors who, because of the way Protestantism is constituted, you have to be very careful. I mean, you have to say the truth, but in their calculus, a given Protestant minister might be like, I don't really like abortion. I think it's evil and rotten and everything, but my congregation is in this neighborhood or this particular part of town, and the demographic that's here actually does support abortion or isn't going to be, become massively opposed to it. And I don't want to really tick them off, because if I do, they'll just go to another Protestant congregation somewhere up and down the street, up the block, around the corner, and I'll lose everything, and I'll lose my livelihood, because that's how it works in Protestantism. You kind of get that, don't agree with it, obviously, but you understand that. What is not understandable and completely mystifying on the Catholic side of it, which makes it worse, is that large numbers of these Catholic bishops, particularly in archdioceses, who over the 100, 200 years have amassed enormous sums of money. The Archdiocese of Detroit, for example, in its endowment fund, I happen to know this, we were in Detroit, I think many people know, for a good number of years. And the Archdiocese of Detroit has $400 million sitting in its endowment fund. The LA Archdiocese has almost $2/3 billion. New York, oh my gosh, I don't even know how you would begin to calculate New York. They own virtually every piece of private land. A lot of people don't realize the Archdiocese of New York, well, it doesn't own the buildings, it owns the land in Manhattan under the buildings and collects lease rent from the buildings, the corporations and the hotels and the apartment buildings. So they're sitting on that land. And they own vast tracts of land all the way up the Hudson to Albany. So the idea that Catholic bishops couldn't dip into their little piggy banks and open up some of this money. They've got a bank in Omaha, Nebraska, I reported on back in the Church Militant days, that has billions and billions of dollars in it. And there's nobody on the board except bishops. So they have the means to be able to do this. And individual dioceses, and archdioceses in particular, have the means to be able to fight against this. Here in Houston, one of the largest endowments of the archdioceses in the country, in the archdiocese, rather, Galveston, Houston. It's called Galveston, Houston here, not just Houston. Enormous, hundreds of millions of dollars. What are they doing with that money? Children are being killed every day, and there's just zero attacking of it, confronting it, nothing. Might, depending on what parish you go to, you might hear a pastor, say something, I guess people would call it extreme, it's just the truth. And you might occasionally hear in the prayers of the faithful, we pray for the sacredness of all life from, the womb to the grave, that it be respected. And that's about it. And everybody sits there like zombies. Lord, hear our prayer. And that's the end of it. Jim, you've been a lifelong Catholic. I mean, I know what you make of it. Why do you think, if you had ever had a chance to talk to people and kind of reflect on this and everything, how did the Catholic Church in particular, Protestants came along and jumped on this train, Protestant pastors, but Catholics are the engineers on this train. Catholic bishops, the hierarchy. Why do they just not give a damn about this? Because they don't.
Well, I think it's all politics. I mean, they think the majority is against them on this issue. And so therefore, they don't want to upset the apple cart, if you will. And that's why I think it's so important then to restart on the pro-life movement and start with those 2 points I made before about stopping late-term abortion and parental consent, because that's where you do have overwhelming support for that. And I think in the churches, your example of the Protestant leaders, the evangelical leaders, their congregations may be queasy about, a total ban on abortion, but they're going to be strong on that, on on stopping late-term abortion and on parental consent for minors. And I think that's how you begin. I think you begin with that. You build consensus around certain points and move forward on them. And I think those are the two that you can certainly unite the pro-life movement around.
I mean, it seems like a pretty easy thing to, you're not saying, because what does the left do? Whenever this issue comes up, they immediately pivot and say, you want to force births of this 10-year-old girl who got raped by her uncle. And, they come up with the absolute worst case scenario. And I'm not making fun of that. I think many of the people in the audience know my mother was raped by her father-in-law violently. Not that any rape is peaceful, but some are particularly violent. And that was what happened to her, which I didn't find out until the evening of the day my father and I buried her. He unloaded 51 years of just horrible, dark secret that I didn't know about when I was growing up. But so, I'm certainly I will never be a person who dismisses rape or treats it lightly or anything like that. Of course. Yeah. But, they always come up with that story. And even when it's real, sort of, or there's elements of truth to it, somehow that one very rare case becomes a blanket for everything. And as you pointed out, politicians sit down on their hands, church leaders, Catholic bishops in particular, who don't want to lose their $1 billion a year from the federal government in handouts for, helping aid illegal immigration. I mean, this is horrible stuff. When these guys die, I mean, this is why a bunch of us are sitting around wondering, over the years, it almost seems like the bishops, Catholic bishops, don't actually believe the faith. How could you possibly let this go on your watch? And, and then take money to help overthrow a country. I mean, are the bishops in these individual dioceses where these illegal aliens are killing people, raping 12, right here in Houston, 14-year-old girl strangled, knifed, and it was horrible. Any sort of sense of responsibility in that, Cardinal DiNardo? Any sort of personal sense of responsibility in that? Any of U.S. bishops? As you're sitting there counting the money that's being given to you by the same people who let these guys in, and you participate in. I mean, I don't think it's just the pro-life movement itself that needs a big start over in the country. And who knows, maybe this is what God's preparing America for, a big giant, do-over, because there are lots of things that need to be do-overed in the United States. Jim, let me ask you, is there what is the polling? I'm almost scared to ask you this in case you actually have an answer. What is the polling that's been done in these 9, possibly 10 states? I mean, we can just expect more of the same, right? This is going to pass.
I haven't seen it, but I haven't seen individual polls on all these things. But the typical poll on a question like this is, high 50s to low 30s in favor of to start off.
Yeah.
So, and there isn't going to be much of an opposition campaign to this either in these states.
No.
So it's, I mean, I think, we've got to get beyond this. And actually, most of those initiatives don't really do much more than already exists.
Yeah, they just
most
lock
of it
in.
is just
that's the point. They just
locking it in.
Yeah.
To their state constitution. That's what most of these are doing because they've already got everything else.
Right.
But it is a starting point then to try to roll some of this back after this election.
Mm-hmm. Well, if they approach that strategy with the same vim and vigor they approach the strategy to prevent from getting to this place to begin with, good luck with that.
Well, the one to watch would be the one in Nebraska that does place some. They have 2 actually initiatives. One counteracts part of the other, which is sort of on this regard, putting some restrictions on abortion. So that's the one that's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, you got maybe sort of a set piece example there of, well, does this work? But who's going to take it up? I mean, what group of people, backed by what? All of this stuff costs money. The left has all the money pouring in. It's, it gets, it's their sacrament. That's it. And they'll protect it come hell or high water. Our sacrament, the Blessed Sacrament, bishops don't care about. And I don't care about we had a Eucharistic year of revival of 3 years. Oh, please. You let Joe Biden go receive communion. Until you put your money where your mouth is, that's all just show. The people there, I'm sure they were very devout and believing and stuff. And, and probably on one level, some of the clergy, hopefully most of the clergy actually believes the church's teachings about the real presence. But they don't defend Jesus in the Eucharist the way the left defends the murder of children. And that ought to tell you something.
That ought to tell us something.
All right, Jim, we're going to see how this all goes. But as we've said, based on what's happened so far, likely not so good. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be back tomorrow with a debate,
Thank you.
Analysis, and wrap up. All right, closing thought here. This election's driving theme is justice. Ultimately, that's what's making this a spiritual contest, a holy war, as Rasmussen polling has labeled it. Justice is spiritual. It derives from God and exists in creation because the Creator possesses justice himself. He is justice. What is justice? Well, in its most pure form, it's giving to each man what he deserves. That's why it's kind of frightening. The communist Democrats, supported by their allies in the mainstream media, have lied and cheated the American people as they have marched towards destroying our nation and, by extension, Western civilization. The only thing communists have ever been honest about is that that's their plan. Everything else has been a lie. They stole their way into power. Once there, they took over the levers of power and abused people's trust to go after those who they targeted as a threat to holding on to power, namely Trump, the man, and the leaders and influencers among MAGA and patriots. Trust is given to a government by its people to do for the people collectively what they would struggle to do for themselves individually. So to abuse that trust is a grave violation of justice, and it must be met with extremely harsh consequences. A couple days ago, Trump issued a statement saying once he's back in power, God willing, meting out those consequences would be part of his agenda. And right on cue, the communist went nuts, accusing him of seeking revenge on his political opponents, which, of course, is pretty ironic when you even barely think about that. Using power to crush, imprison, bankrupt, and even attempt to kill their opponents is the standard that has been set by them. Now that Trump promises to flip the script on them, now they get all high and mighty. You can bet your bottom dollar this issue comes up in the debate, and Trump should walk right up to it and embrace it. Communists lie and they destroy, and they need to be held accountable. Justice demands it. God love you. I'm Gary Michael Vorse.